nothing but success from here on out. Good evening. My name is Brian Rogov. I'm the CEO of XCL Education, and I'm very pleased to have this hybrid event where we have some folks with us here at the World Academy in Singapore and plenty of people across Asia joining us remotely. Very pleased to announce our first inaugural XCL Dialogues. This is a session that we've set up which will be ongoing and recurring, and it was really set up to provide unique learning opportunities for students. We're thrilled to have a guest this evening, Tom Wright, renowned author, to talk with us today, with our students as well. And with that, I want to welcome Glenn and Tom up to the stage.
Tom?
Hello.
How are you doing?
Very well.
Good. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the World Academy Auditorium. So nice to have all of you here in Singapore with us and hundreds of you joining us from around the world for this inaugural XCL Dialogue. As Brian mentioned just briefly, this is a series of talks that is absolutely meant to benefit students, teachers, parents, and the broader community, talking to journalists, talking to business leaders, scholars, authors, people of interest who have interesting ideas, who have set themselves apart as thought leaders in our current context, in our current world. I'm very excited to be the first one to host this, along with Tom. We're going to get to it in just a moment. First, a few words about Tom. Tom is an acclaimed Wall Street Journal reporter, as you may already know. He has been a reporter for some 20 years, much of that time across Asia. He is the co-author of this Pulitzer Prize nominated book, The $1 Billion Whale, along with his co-author Bradley Hope. And he and Bradley and a team of folks were co-nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Tom has also won the Gerald Loeb Award for international reporting. If you're not familiar with that, a very prestigious award that is given out for that effort. And also the Trace International Investigative Award for reporting as well. During his time, Tom has covered many stories, many issues, a lot of finance stories. In fact, if you Google him and his list of stories, you get to the Wall Street Journal site, and it's some 13 pages of different stories that you have done. Many of those pages related to 1MDB, which we'll talk about today, but many other stories as well. So Tom's breadth and knowledge about business across Asia and elsewhere is really quite unparalleled. So let's get started. How are you feeling today?
I'm good. I'm very happy to be here.
Good. Happy to have you here. Let's start and talk about journalism first. The field of journalism has changed quite a lot, and we have seen, especially in recent years, the rise of fake news or people claiming that there is fake news, etc. Tell us your view of why your work as a journalist you feel is important today for people to have access to good quality journalism.
Well, I should say that I was with the Wall Street Journal for 20 plus years, but I actually left 2 years ago to set up my own company we're calling it a journalism production studio. So we're still doing journalism. I was very proud to work for the Wall Street Journal, and I still think it's a great publication. And one of the most amazing things about the journal is it's very, very careful about what it publishes. And you talked about fake news. I think one of the big dangers today is that the publications are becoming a lot closer to editorial in the news pages. By that I mean that, I hate to say it, but sometimes I feel like the Washington Post and the New York Times are a little bit too editorializing in the way that they cover things. And I think the Wall Street Journal has been very, very careful to keep that neutral line. Now, of course, there's no such thing as exact neutrality in journalism. You're never going to attain that. You approach every story with your own personal set of views.
Conscious or unconscious bias.
Conscious or unconscious, yeah. I mean, most of us would agree that Western democracies are a good thing,
right.
But that isn't how you would approach a story if you work for the China state-owned newspaper, right? So we have our values, but in this world of so-called fake news, I just think it's so important that you bring something to every story you do. And by that I mean some original reporting. You really need to just bring the goods. People aren't interested, I don't think readers are really that interested in editorializing. They want you to tell them something new about something they don't know. And that takes hard work. And it also takes a lot of investment from a newspaper owner, because they have to, to give an investigative journalist the time to go and do the reporting on a story, that costs a lot of money. But that, I think, is really where, that's a slightly different question, this question about whether the journalism model is somehow broken, because, sometimes clickbait earns you more cash. Oftentimes does. And that again is probably driving fake news in a way. It's more appealing to have a quick take on something, whereas the boring work or the long and difficult work of finding out something new, that it costs money, because you need experienced journalists to do it, and they don't produce a lot of volume working on that model. And
your new company, Project Brazen, is, as you mentioned, it's going to be following stories, investigating stories. What does that look like? Are you basically going to be your own newspaper, but just a smaller group of people doing it and doing it on a different level? How does that work?
So my co-founder, Bradley Hope, who I wrote $1 Billion Whale with, and I have set up Project Brazen here in Singapore. It's actually it's a PTE Limited here in Singapore. Bradley's based in London. I'm here. We are going to produce content. A lot of it's going to be investigative content, like we've always done. And we're going to produce. We've got a book contract that we're working on. We've got a podcast we're working on. Podcasts are really a very exciting way to put down a story now and to reach a wider audience, but still do it with the same sort of level of investigative standards that we've always had in our journalism jobs. And Project Brazen is the first step is to do books and podcasts. The second step is to turn those into TV shows and films in Hollywood. And so that's what we're trying to do. $1 Billion Whale is getting turned into a TV show now. It was going to be a movie. Now it's going to be a TV show, which is going to be produced by the makers of Crazy Rich Asians, which is actually, obviously was based in Singapore and has the company is a Singapore owner. And Bradley has a second book called Blood and Oil, which was about Mohammed bin Salman and the killing of Khashoggi. That's also getting turned into a TV show. So we've got a bunch of projects that we're working on, and some other ones we can't really talk about that are in the pipeline.
Is there a danger, though, in even that, as you're doing investigative reporting, to have books like $1 Billion Whale and the other one that Bradley's working on? Is there a danger in having that become a Hollywood product? And where the focus is taken actually off the journalism, because most of the time those made-for-Hollywood movies do not follow the plot line exactly. There are great liberties taken. Yes. Does that do a disservice to the hard work that you or other investigative journalists do?
I don't think so, because I'm sure when they turn, we'll be executive producers on $1 Billion Whale, and when they turn a work of nonfiction, I mean, every word of that is something that happened, right? Because you can't take liberties with the truth with a book like that, because you'll get sued. But then when you fictionalize something, I think it's understood that this is based on reality, and that there are certain plot lines that are built in. But again, even when they fictionalize this, they're going to have to be very careful that they don't get sued, right? You can do different things. You can get someone's life rights when you develop a Hollywood movie or TV show, which inoculates you against future troubles, because the subject of your, signs a document saying, well, I give you the right to develop my life. In the case of $1 Billion Whale, which is obviously about Jolo, this fraudster from Malaysia, he's on the run in China. He isn't giving his life rights to anyone, so you have to just be careful that, I think even in the adaptation, that it has to be something that really happened.
Yeah.
And at Project Brazen, we're going to produce stories that, the way we do the first iteration, the podcast or the book, will be just exactly the same as we've always done journalism, which is, this really happened and our sourcing is immaculate. So.
The world in which we live, the lines between journalism and commerce have blurred, and they've been blurred for more than, for decades now, quite honestly, but increasingly blurred. For example, in the morning I listen to the Reuters news on Google on my mobile device in the morning, and at the very beginning they say it's sponsored by such and such a company. When you watch a business news station and you see the ticker across the bottom with the stock quotes, it's always sponsored by a profit-making company. Is journalism too close to business these days, in specific or in general, to be distant enough to tell the stories it needs to tell in the way that it needs to tell them?
I mean, I don't think it's. I think, as you're saying, it's not a new thing, right? Obviously, back in the in the 1920s, some of the richest men in America were newspaper owners.
Right.
So it's always been the case, and I don't think you're going to get a perfect situation where there's a no profit motive in news. So, but I think what's important is that when Rupert Murdoch bought the Wall Street Journal back 13 or 14 years ago now, everyone said, well, the Wall Street Journal's finished. It's going to be part of this Murdoch empire. Murdoch's got a right-wing agenda. And I was working inside the journal for all that time, and I didn't see that happen. There is obviously a Murdoch part of Murdoch's empire that's much more editorial, which is Fox and Fox Business. But in terms of how the journal was run under that, I don't think it was particularly damaging to the way that the culture. The most important thing is you have a corporate culture inside each publication, with editors who adhere to very high standards and train the staff in how to, follow those standards. That's the way that journalism remains powerful and strong. There are countries I've operated in, like Pakistan, for example, where I worked for many years, where journalists take money to do stories.
Right.
And so if you have that culture where that's accepted, then you're going to have a democratic deficit in countries where the press act like that. So a lot of it comes down to how the proprietor acts, how much training there is for journalists in countries as well. How are there good journalism schools? Are they churning out people with really high standards? Obviously in America you've got Columbia journalism schools like that churn out great journalists, and then they go to institutions that have good standards. The Times, the Post, the Journal. So you just need that structure.
What will it take for news organizations to continue to invest in investigative journalism, the stuff that you've been involved in, the stories that really can change the way society looks at a problem or at a corrupt government or a person or et cetera? What will it take? Because as you mentioned a bit earlier, it's very expensive to let a team take 2 months or 3 months off to investigate a story, to write it properly and research it, when news staffs are very thin and there's a lot of pressure to maximize output from the staff that they have.
One of the most worrying things that's happened recently in America is the hollowing out of the local newspaper industry. Yeah. Because the readership died. They were driven by classified ads. You wanted to sell a car in America, you put it in the local newspaper classified ads, and that drove their revenues, and that model's been killed. So what you really need is, you're getting, the LA Times was bought by a billionaire who'd made his money elsewhere. Warren Buffett at one point invested in the Post. Maybe he's still invested there. Mm-hmm. You've got these big families that used to own papers. So you've got the Salzburgers for the New York Times. Right. Used to be the Bancroft family for the Wall Street Journal. So the idea was
Grahams with Washington Post.
The Grahams of the Washington Post. Yeah. So the idea was that these big families who'd made their money elsewhere would own newspapers for philanthropic reasons almost. There's obviously power reasons for owning them. But that sort of died. Local newspapers have gotten hollowed out. The risk with all of this is that if you're a corrupt local mayor in America, it's easier to be a corrupt local mayor these days without good local journalists stopping you being corrupt by reporting on what you do. Yeah. But we should look at the whole world. America's in a lot of a better place than, say, India. If you look at the Committee to Protect Journalists, which is an NGO that monitors journalism deaths around the world, most of the deaths are always in places like India, Russia, places with totally corrupt governments where if you annoy someone as a journalist, you just get killed, right? And so that's what happens in Bihar and India and in Russia. You see it over and over again. So that's a different scale of problem in some of these other places.
Yeah. Let's look at technology, because technology can be very much a force for good in investigative reporting, looking at data, looking at information. Data journalism is something that some of the students here might actually be interested in studying at some point or have been studying already. But also the advent of AI and AI writers. Reuters, all the major business news organizations have been using AI writers to write hundreds of stories a day, financial reports and things like that, for many years already. So do we run a risk of getting away from the good, hard work of real humans? Or is the opposite side of that argument, AI can be much more effective in scraping the internet for good data and write good stories itself?
So I'm not an expert on AI or data, so I'll preface my answer with saying that, and I'm sure there's a lot of good work you could do with data scraping for stories. But we did try. I was the Asia economics editor for a while at the Journal, and we tried to do this. We tried to sort of take data sets and analyze them with programming. We had some programmers in the office. One thing we tried to do was show that stock front running was happening on the Hong Kong stock market. This front running is where people get inside information and they buy stocks before that information becomes public. And we tried to do that, and it wasn't successful at all, because I don't think you can beat human. Journalism isn't a very complicated profession. You have to get to know people, be a good networker, and then use your network to find out what's going on. And one of the best ways to break news is to get whistleblowers to come to you with their information. So with the 1MDB fraud, we were able to break it because somebody in the Malaysian government came to us and said, look, we're really worried about what Prime Minister Najib Razak is doing in our country, which is stealing billions of dollars. And so here's his bank account, and here's his credit card statements, and here's all this information. And so those are the kind of things that you need. It's that human intelligence that you need. And then the second part of the job is knowing how to triangulate information. So if you tell me something, then I can't just print that, right? I need a second source, or I need a. So we did that a lot in Billion Dollar Whale, where we'd get documents about somebody's bank account, but then we'd see a name of a company here, and we'd see it in a different document there, and we'd be able to work out. And so that, I feel like those two skills, the networking skills, and then the sort of the analytical skills. So for any students who are here, things you learn in school here, how to write essays, how to take multiple sources and push them all into one essay. That's what you need to do to be a really good journalist. I think those are the transferable skills. It doesn't matter whether you're writing a history essay or a social science project or whatever it is. Those are the same skills you're going to need to be a good journalist.
Those writing skills, that ability to synthesize information.
Yeah. So I don't know whether. I mean, I'm just not a computer guy. So maybe there's a great way AI can feed into all of what I do, but I just don't. I mean, I haven't seen it, and I don't know.
Why did you, or when did you first decide that journalism was going to be your career? Was there a light bulb moment?
Yeah, I think it's maybe not at the time. There wasn't a light bulb moment, but if I you asked me before, and if I look back on when I was at school, what was the moment where I felt journalism was something I was really interested in? Was in 1984. So I was born in 1974. In 1984, there was a film called The Killing Fields about a famous New York Times journalist who had been involved in covering Cambodia and the Khmer Rouge genocide in 1975 in the second half of the 1970s. So I was 10, and I saw that film, probably age inappropriate, but
very much.
I loved it, and I was fascinated by this place that I hadn't heard of. I was living in Birmingham in the UK, which is pretty far from the Killing Fields. And yeah, I was hooked by this idea of, there were lots of journalism films in the 80s, right? There was the one with Mel Gibson about Indonesia.
That was a fantastic book, The Year of Living Dangerously.
The Year of Living Dangerously.
Yeah.
And then I ended up in Indonesia on a gap year between high school and university, and fell in love with Indonesia, learned to speak Indonesian, and then I got internships at Reuters when I was at college in the UK. So I did a summer in Indonesia and a summer in Rome. And I just learned yesterday that my batchmate is now the editor, just got named the first female editor-in-chief at Reuters,
Wow.
Alessandra Galloni. So I'm feeling old because
Impressive.
yeah, she's gone on to become like the #1 person at the whole of Reuters now. So
Wow, awesome.
Yeah.
When you look forward to how journalism needs to evolve, as you get up every day to cover stories, what excites you about the evolution of journalism, of your particular brand, of what you're doing with Project Brazen? What excites you every day now that you are in this next chapter of your journalistic life?
Well, there are so many good stories, right? Like I think the difference between a good journalist, or at least a hardworking journalist, and a mediocre one is that I used to have staff at the Journal. Some of the reporters would say, "Oh well, it's hard to get stories. There's nothing happening." It's always something happening. It's just how do you find it? And so what excites me is that, we're hearing this talking to Hollywood executives. People want true stories these days. If you look on Netflix, how many things you see there are based on reality. There's a Charles Sobhraj thing on Netflix now about Charles Sobhraj who preyed on backpackers in Southeast Asia in the 80s. That's based on a real thing, right? Why make up something, totally fictionalize something, when you can, that will still happen, but it's so great that TV and film are now realizing that based on a true story is and to your point earlier, they hew much more closely to what really happened, I think, than they would have done in the past. In the past, you'd have got these, very Americanized versions of Asia would happen, or the Middle East, where you get one character in a fez that was the Middle Eastern character. Now you get Fauda, brilliant show, Israeli show, and very sophisticated. When you watch these things now, you have to Google to understand who's who and why are Sinbet and why are Mossad agents, why are they fluent in Arabic, and there's all these. So I think things have just got much more sophisticated. So I think that's what keeps me going. Like, how many great true stories can you find and develop?
Do you feel like you have a calling? Do you feel like you have a mission to expose wrongdoing, to get stories out?
No.
How do you approach that kind of question?
I think I always say that I do it like everyone does anything in life. You do it for your personal, professional advancement, maybe glory or whatever. Rather than I never trusted journalists who said they did things for some altruistic reason. Well, I don't trust anyone who says they do things for altruistic reasons. Not even Mother Teresa.
Not even Mother Teresa?
I think a good journalist should be very skeptical about people's personal reasons to do things. So I don't do it to be a do-gooder at all. I just find it very interesting. And I think, if you can go by the do no evil mantra, that's good enough, right? I think if you start, as a journalist especially, if you start to think, I want to change that, you become an activist, not a journalist. And so you're going to get into dangerous territory. And then also it becomes a lot more dangerous for you physically. If people you cover see you as an actor in a game, that's difficult for you, right? Like Khashoggi, who got killed, obviously tragic, but he wasn't. He also
the Egyptian official in Turkey.
Yeah, the Saudi
writer,
journalist. But he wasn't just. He stepped over the boundaries from journalism to other things. Not obviously should not have been killed, but it's just very dangerous when you become a consultant or do other things that are outside of journalism.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the main event, which is this book. Now, those of you in the auditorium here in Singapore, all of you are going to receive a copy of this book, autographed by Tom, at the end of the session tonight. So if you haven't read it, you will have a great opportunity to do so. You can also get it through the National Library here in Singapore. They have it on audio. They have it on. You can rent it online, but you will have your own autographed copy to do that. The $1 Billion Whale is roughly it's a story of one of the biggest government corruption scandals in history that we know about. There might be others, which hopefully maybe you'll find in Project Brazen, but and it involves billions of dollars of money that was set aside for a development fund in Malaysia, ostensibly to help make Malaysia better for Malaysians, building projects and such things like that. But some interesting characters got involved, which you're about to tell us about a little bit more. And very quickly, if you haven't read this book, as you read it, and Tom was talking about it being a TV show or a movie coming up, you, as a Hollywood writer, you literally could not write a more amazing story than what actually happened in reality in Malaysia and around the world with 1MDB and this scandal. So the first reporting I saw you write as I researched back was around this time, July of 2015. I don't know if that rings a bell or not to you, but that was the first story you wrote about that. Now here we are, 6 years later. First of all, give us the breadth of what this scandal covers for those in the audience here in Singapore or at home or around the world, that if they haven't really been up to speed on all the details. And I know you could go on for days talking about it, but give us the high level.
The high level, the 10,000 foot, it's a very complicated story, but the very basic version of it is, if you control, in some governments in the world are like mafia organizations. And Malaysia under Najib was like that.
Ratsik Najib, the Prime Minister.
Yeah, the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, now a convicted felon, Najib Razak. He, although he's out on appeal running around Malaysia. So if you can control the finances of a corrupt nation like Malaysia or Russia or a nation like you could put into that bucket, you can become extremely rich extremely quickly. A lot of Middle Eastern countries fall into this as well. Jolo was this very young, very ambitious Malaysian Chinese guy from Penang who realized that dynamic. And he befriended Najib Razak through Najib Razak's stepson, Riza Aziz, who he knew from London. And he befriended the similar types of people in the Middle East. And he was able to use his connections in the Middle East and in Malaysia to get himself involved in these deals where they would just move government money, very simply, from the Middle East to Malaysia. And Jolo would take a cut. And he actually, before this scandal that we recount in the book, he had already taken $100 million doing that, illegally, taking his cut from these flows of money between countries. This is illegal because this is money that should be going into development to make Malaysia a better place, to make Middle Eastern countries a better place.
That's the thing. It was people that had invested money into this 1MDB fund with the thought that it was going to go toward building roads and hospitals and schools and public projects, right?
So then he, after doing this initial fraud, he then hits upon this idea of, if I set up a fund, they're called sovereign wealth funds. A lot of governments have them. They manage big amounts of money. Now they're supposed to be, good. They're supposed to be for the good. Like
honest and dependable.
Well, Norway has one, for example. Yeah. So Norway takes all of its oil revenues, puts it into a sovereign wealth fund, and then uses it to pay for roads and schooling, free schooling, and all this kind of stuff. And it's used properly. It's a custodian of the state's wealth. Jolo sets up 1MDB with Najib's connivance. He couldn't have done it by himself. He has the prime minister of a country doing this. Najib's reasons for doing it was he could use the money from this fund for his political ambitions, because he came from a political family, very worried about losing power. His wife, Rosma Mansour, if you're aware of her, when she was arrested a couple of years ago, she had $250 million of loose items in her apartment. Handbags, jewelry, watches, incredible Birkin bags. So she was able to get all her jewelry from this money. And Jolo stole the majority of it. Now, it wasn't like a sovereign wealth fund like Norway, where the oil money was put into it. They raised the money. Mm-hmm. So this is another part of the story. We're living in a world of huge capital flows. We've got a lot of poor people.
So what's a capital flow?
Maybe you can explain that. Huge amounts of money in the world right now. And this is because since the global financial crisis, the mortgage meltdown over a decade ago, interest rates have been extremely low and negative. And so, ordinary people are suffering, but people who have access to that huge amount of money have a lot of money. And so
they're looking for some place to invest it, right? Where they can make money off their money.
Correct. Yeah. So when Jolo had this bright idea, he said, look, we don't even have to take money that exists in Malaysia. We'll go raise this money and then steal it. And so they raised billions and billions of dollars. And that's where Goldman Sachs comes in, the American investment bank, because Goldman Sachs helped to raise that money. And a Goldman banker helped to steal it. He's pleaded guilty to helping steal 200 million. So that takes us to another part of the story, which is, it's not just corrupt mafia-like countries where money is stolen. Western institutions, gold-plated Western institutions like Goldman Sachs are helping do the looting.
One interesting part about the book, and as you can tell, it's a very complicated web, but the book is actually very easy to read from the perspective of you take it chronologically, and unfortunately not too many pictures for those of you who like pictures in your reading, but the pictures you will get in your mind are unbelievable. The things they spent money on, you talk about, 20 or 30 or 40 million dollars, like we might talk about $20 or $30, right? These guys were spending money that was just these unreal amounts. And there were systems in place. For example, the Goldman Sachs Bank and a number of other banks were involved in this. There were systems in place to catch corruption. And at almost every phase, at every step, those systems failed. And I want to take you just into that. As an investigative journalist, were you surprised to see that so many of the good systems that were put in place to catch corruption were either ignored or in some way failed?
Not really surprised. I mean, one of the big problems is that, this greed is good line from the Wall Street movie from the 1980s, where Gordon Gekko says greed is good. I mean, that's how capitalism functions. And so one of the problems is that, so Goldman helps raise all this money, right? And Goldman makes $600 million in profit for helping raise this money, which is not the kind of money they should have been making. The reason Goldman made so much money was because they were willing to pay them so much because the whole thing was corrupt. They just wanted the money quickly, no questions asked. And so they paid Goldman a lot of money to raise money for them.
How much money should they have made? I mean, it was
like $1 million.
Yeah, they should have made $1 million, not
and they made
600
600 million. Yeah,
Yeah.
they made a couple of million maximum. Selling government bonds is not a very risky thing to do. It's a guaranteed, it's a small margin business. The problem we have in the financial world is that the regulators are paid by the banks. So, or the companies are paid by, the auditors who are supposed to go in and check there's no financial shenanigans are paid by the companies, right? So, Deloitte Touche and KPMG and all these companies that did work for 1MDB were paid by 1MDB. So nobody caught the financial crime. Same thing for Goldman, the compliance people. I've seen the emails, the compliance people in Goldman who are supposed to say, hey, let's not do this business looks really shady, are finding ways to make the business happen. And it's very simple. Their bonuses,
because they know they're going to make money off it if they approve these things.
People made life-changing amounts of money on this.
Yeah.
Now, Jolo himself, we should talk a little about what they did with the money. So Jolo, when he first stole the money in 2009, he wanted to become like a Hollywood mogul. So he sets up a film company that goes on to make The Wolf of Wall Street. And he also just wants to party. So he was paying Paris Hilton. At one point, they were in a casino, and he gives $250,000 of gambling chips to Paris Hilton so she can just gamble on her birthday. So, people's lives Paris Hilton was already wealthy, but, other people's lives would change. They would be walking with Jolo, and he would be drunk, and he would drop $50,000 worth of gambling chips on the floor, and people would just pick them up, and they've got $50,000. He would buy people Cartier watches on a whim, because he'd stolen billions of dollars. So he became a renowned figure in that sort of party world. And I don't know if you guys have seen here in Marina Bay Sands, there's a Marquee nightclub.
Mm-hmm.
Marquee is owned by a pair of investors, or wasn't owned by a pair of investors called Tepperberg and Strauss, Jason Strauss and Noah Tepperberg. And Jolo became their number one client. And he would just spend millions of dollars on champagne in their nightclubs, for no reason, and became their biggest profit source. And in not the marquee here in Singapore, but the marquee in New York City and in their clubs in Vegas. So Jolo was just spending money like crazy.
But at the same time, he was getting close with Leonardo DiCaprio and Martin Scorsese, Hollywood giants, and Jamie Foxx, the actor and singer, and the Kardashians, Kim Kardashian. I mean, he was just collecting and paying for all these great parties and things to become a player, right?
Well, there's a funny story. He bought Kim Kardashian I think it was a white Ferrari for her wedding to her first husband, Chris Humphries. And they got, I don't know if you remember that story, Kim Kardashian got divorced from Chris Humphries like days after getting married or weeks after getting married. And a lot of the guests were like, we want our wedding gifts back because you guys weren't married for long enough. And in the ensuing legal tussle between Chris Humphries and Kim Kardashian over the this gets to how do we find out about things as journalists.
Yeah.
Chris Humphries complained about not getting his half share of the white Ferrari bought by a Malaysian businessman. And so we were like, there's only one Malaysian businessman that's buying white Ferraris for people for their weddings, and that's Jolo. So yeah, we figured it out.
But as you go through the book, at one moment, all of this seems like such a glamorous life, mega yachts in the south of France and flying jets on New Year's Eve to Australia to celebrate New Year's, and then flying back 15 hours to Las Vegas to celebrate New Year's twice. I think it was 2013, New Year's Eve 2013. He's got a plane, a private jet. It was a large one. It wasn't like a 747, but it was.
I think it was a 737.
737, right?
Yeah.
That could hold 40 people, right?
Yeah.
So you can imagine it was pretty luxurious. But on the one hand, all of this sounds really great, right? For most people, like, wow, that would be a cool life to have, that. But the next paragraph or two paragraphs later, you realize that it was money that was stolen from people that was never going to get repaid, and that more money had to be stolen to cover up the money that was already stolen.
Yep.
This just must have just blown your mind as you're doing all this research.
Well, so the point is white-collar crime, it's often very easy to say there's no victim in white-collar crime, right? Now, if I murder Glenn now, then there's an obvious victim.
Yeah.
Your family, your dad, your family is upset. In white-collar crime, and you talk about, we had this trouble with the book, like how do you personify a victim of white-collar crime? If you say, it's a poor Malaysian who doesn't have a school, there's no direct correlation between this crime and that person. And how do you, not having something is very hard to show as well. But I think in the long run, so the reason that the US is actually, the US has a rule called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And it's one of the only countries in the world that tries to stop its citizens being corrupt in other countries. You can't be Goldman Sachs and do what they did. This is why Goldman Sachs got fined $5 billion, right? Because you can't go abroad and be
a bad actor.
Right.
Yeah.
So they try to police. They try to put their standards on foreign countries. Basically.
Yeah. I remember one part of the book where the ex-Prime Minister Najib's wife Rosma was complaining to friends about how it cost $400 to get her hair dyed at her hair salon. And you made the point that was the average monthly salary for many Malaysians at that point.
Yeah.
And this, I guess, gets back to the point, that was money that was taken from the fund in some way, shape, or form.
I lost my train of thought just then. What I was going to say was for the Americans, for the American government, they realized that a destabilized world of kleptocracy obviously means rule by thieves in Greek, right? That if you have all these mafia-like countries around the world, it's terrible for national security for America too, because that's when Malaysia's not there, but you end up like Afghanistan, and then you get Al-Qaeda hanging out there, right? You need to have a global order where you've got stable governments and terrorism does not arise in those places. It seems unrelated to white-collar crime, but if Malaysia kept going down the Najib path, how far away is it from, in the future, having failed state problems, And then you get all kinds of other issues. So the US is trying to say, look, we need to, look at Russia. Russia's a very dangerous place with, dangerous actors there.
Yeah.
And we need to create as many countries that aren't like that Najib got arrested and Malaysia stepped back from the precipice, and it's not perfect, what's going on there now, but it's better than if Najib had stayed in power. Who knows what would have occurred.
Or not according to probably to some of the people that were getting paid off while he was in power, right? Leading to your point about kleptocracy. All right, so give us the high view of where the 1MDB scandal is right now. What has happened in the years since reporting by you and the Sarawak Journal, I believe it is?
Yeah.
They really broke the story in many ways and did a great job of exposing this. Where is the case now? What has happened?
Well, so interestingly, Singapore, I believe, is the only place in the world that has jailed anybody in the 1MDB scandal. Singapore was very fast to arrest, and the way that Singapore enters this story is because Jolo took over a bank here, not actually a Singapore bank, a Swiss bank, but it was based here, and used it to move money around. And all those guys were involved in the corruption. The bank was called BSI, so a Swiss-Italian bank. So bankers from that bank got jailed in Singapore. They did jail time. One guy, I think, is still in jail. So they're very quick to take action. Switzerland has not done anything yet that we know of, hasn't jailed anyone as we know of. Malaysia and Singapore and the US have indicted Jolo with criminal charges, but he's not turned up to face the charges.
We'll talk about him in a minute.
We'll talk about him later.
Okay. Yeah.
Najib got arrested. Najib lost power in an election. Obviously, you're going to know this, most of you here, in April of 2018. And that was very bad for him because once he lost power, he could stop controlling the country. He was controlling the Attorney General. He put in his man as Attorney General so that nothing would happen in the court cases. Once he lost power, a new Attorney General came in, he got arrested. Excuse me. So
and convicted.
And convicted, yeah, convicted and given 12 years in jail. Now, apparently in Malaysia, when you're convicted and out on appeal, you can continue to wander around and take part in campaigning for your political party. I just don't understand what that is. And then Goldman Sachs was fined $5 billion between Malaysia and the US, it's the largest ever fine under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. A guy called Tim Leissner, who was a partner with Goldman based here in Singapore, has pleaded guilty to stealing $200 million, but has not yet been sentenced. He's cooperating, so that will still happen, and that will be the highest level banker from a major bank to go to jail in ever, I think, probably. The problem in Wall Street is no one ever goes to jail, right? They just get given, banks sign these deferred prosecution agreements and no individuals get charged. And that is a problem with white-collar crime, right? Unless the senior management go to jail, then it's not enough of a deterrent. If you just pay a fine, you can write it into your business model, right? That you pay these fines.
You've mentioned maybe 5 or 6 people in specific that have been caught, corrupt, and convicted. But in the book, there is 25 or 30, like dozens and dozens of people that you can name that were involved in corruption in some way. The rest of them just walking away?
Well, let's take an example of somebody. Pras Michel, who was in the 1990s hip-hop band The Fugees, and then he had a short-lived solo career with Ghetto Superstar. He's been indicted for illegally contributing Jolo's money into U.S. politics. Oh. And then he also helped. So when Jolo was on the run, Jolo tried to get the Trump administration to drop the charges into him. And one way he did that was he tried to funnel money into the Department of Justice via Pras Michel, of all people. Pras Michel was someone that Jolo knew from partying. Pras Michel happened to have a friend who worked in the Department of Justice. So there's people like that who've been indicted, and we don't know what's going to happen to them. There's other people like Elliot Broidy, who was a businessman who tried to help Jolo get out of his charges. He was pardoned by Trump on Trump's last day in office. He was one of those people that Trump pardoned. So some people have got away with it. Then there are people who, they're never going to get indicted because they didn't do anything criminal, but they just look a bit dodgy, Yeah. So like Jamie Foxx, for example, would turn up and take,
on many occasions, right?
$500,000 or whatever it was to perform or to MC at an event. Now, the question is, Jamie Foxx would say, well, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't know there was anything wrong with Jolo. But our reporting is that everybody knew Jolo was shady in real time at the time. So, you know, it's very easy to say, well, I didn't know anything about him, but
Right.
I think that's not possibly right.
Fascinating. Okay, we're going to move on because thank you, Tom, for that overview of what's going on. We have a section now of who, what, where, when, why, and how, which are the typical questions that journalists will ask in any story. But now it's your turn to ask those questions. We have 5 students here in the auditorium in Singapore that are each going to ask a different question. So can we have the first who question come up to the microphone here? Who's gonna ask that question? Don't be shy. Oh, there you go. Great. If you can take off your mask and speak right into the microphone, tell us your name, your grade, and where you're from. Come closer.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes.
A little bit louder. Yeah.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much for organizing, and especially thank you, Tom.
Sure.
And I'm Elizabeth, and I'm currently in grade 12, originally from Lithuania.
Okay.
And I'm here from The Vantage Point, which is our school magazine here. So the first who question that we all collectively came up with was, as young writers, we're still developing our writing style. And over your many years of experience in journalism and writing, who have you turned to for guidance and direction? Someone who influenced you?
Who did I turn to
Yes.
for guidance?
Yeah. Thank you.
So I was very lucky to work for a guy called Paul Beckett. Paul is, and I worked for him for 10 years. Paul is the Washington bureau chief now for the Wall Street Journal, which is obviously a very important job and a very difficult job, right? Especially during the Trump administration. So I first worked for Paul in, I guess, 2006 or 7. And I worked for him through to when I left the journal in 2019, so over 10 years. And he's a fantastic editor. He was a great reporter when he was a reporter. He's about 10 years older than me. And I think it's always good to have a mentor about 10 years older than you. That's like a good, I found that a good thing. And he was very important to me because, first of all, he taught me a lot about the things we've talked about today. You know, like how do you decide what you write about? How do you hold powerful people to account? He's a really fearless guy. Like he will be very, very... Here's a story about him. We once did a interview. We were doing a series of stories about an Indian wind turbine company called Suzlon. And Suzlon had sort of stolen its technology from its German partner. And we sat down at a table with Suzlon, a very charged meeting, because we were writing this story that ended up killing their stock price. And Suzlon gave us a model windmill, a model of one of their windmills. And it was sort of made in quite an expensive-looking way with expensive material. Now, we have this rule at the Journal that you couldn't take anything for more than $20 of a gift. It's very important in journalism. You don't take free dinners, don't take, you know, especially from the people you're covering, never. And Paul just took this windmill and this package that their PR people had given us and just pushed it back across the table to them, you know. And we used to send back our Chinese New Year hampers in the office because of Paul. And, you know, he's half American, half Scottish, quite a gruff guy. But I think it's very important that you have somebody who teaches you, you know, because when you're a young journalist, it's difficult, you know, maybe pushing back that thing would seem rude, right? Or sending back the hamper would seem rude. But ultimately, you know, I learned from him that we're here to do a job, you know, which is remaining independent. So, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you. Okay, our next question is a what question. And who is going to do that? Okay, you're coming down. Good. And by the way, after we get finished with the who, what, where, when, why, how questions, we'll take other questions from the audience. So if you have a question for Tom, please be ready with it. We'd love to have you come and ask that for Tom as well. Okay, your name, your age, and we have to change the mic little boot
Okay,
there.
can you hear me?
Hi, yeah.
Hi, my name is Federica. I'm from Italy, grade 12 now here. So my question is, so at the time of Jalloud, like we said before, Najib Razak was the prime minister with the UMNO party. So my question would be, like, my understanding of the political situation of Malaysia now is that this party is trying again to run in the election, and it seems to be popular again. So what do you think about this current political situation? And what do you think that your book had and what impact do you think your book had on the Malaysian people as well as people in general, like on understanding corruption and how it could go unnoticed, especially if you don't have inside knowledge?
Good question.
Thanks. Yeah, UMNO is,
UMNO
strong,
is-
is strong and continues to be strong on the rise.
So the Muhyiddin, the prime minister now, he obviously came from UMNO.
Right.
And I think you get, in a lot of countries, corrupt countries, you get these rainbow coalitions where people just come in and out of government the whole time. You get it in Indonesia a lot as well. When UMNO lost power, when Najib was kicked out, that was the first time UMNO had ever lost power since Malaysia became an independent country in 1957, right? Or 56, 57, whenever it is. They're not back in power, but there's all this talk that they could be. I think part of the reason that they were in power for so long is because of the system in Malaysia where, Malays are given jobs and handouts and this kind of thing, and that then leads them to vote, people in rural areas to vote for them. And the UMNO's undoing partly was 1MDB, the fraud was so huge, and partly was the fact that there are more urban voters these days. And urban voters are more sophisticated. They don't think I'll vote for you just because I get a handout. So I think that's, can UMNO come back to power? Maybe. I'm not a Malaysian politics expert, but definitely in terms of what impact did 1MDB have on the voters, I think huge. Like when the book was, we were very lucky with the timing of the book because, first of all, it would never have sold in Malaysia if Najib had been in power. They would have just found a way to ban it under sedition acts or whatever. Instead, he lost power, and then the book came out quite soon after. And we did a signing event in Kinokuniya in the Twin Towers, and there was a queue of people around the corner, like they queued for hours just to
the Petronas Towers.
In the Petronas Towers, yeah, just to get books signed. And I think there was it wasn't really us that created that moment. There was a moment in Malaysia because of kicking out UMNO and Najib getting arrested and all of this. But the book sort of rode that wave and was somehow part of it. And it was quite embarrassing because I was signing books and people would just say for hours, "Thank you for saving Malaysia," as if we'd done that, which I just didn't feel was what had happened. But definitely there was this idea, and it was very sad to see how short-lived the new government was, and it's sort of gone back to its politicking ways. But
Great.
One step forward,
Often the way it is, right?
Yeah.
2 steps back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, who's asking our where question? Come on down.
These are great questions, by the way. Yeah.
When I saw
Yeah.
the questions, I was amazed at how good they were. So again, please give us your name, what grade you're in. Oh, are you okay? All right, your name, your grade, and where you're from. Just come on right up to the microphone. Speak up nice and clear. And if you want to just take your mask down, and then we can hear you. Yeah, thanks.
I'm Jessica. And
Come a little closer. Yeah.
I'm Jessica. I'm 14. I'm from California. My question is, where do you think Joe Loeb is now?
Thank you. The
Yeah.
question that everybody wants to know. Where is Joe Loeb? Because
So-
he's wanted by 3 countries, right?
Yeah, including Singapore. Singapore's actually got an open arrest warrant out for him, as well as Malaysia and the US. He's in China. We sort of last knew precisely where he was in late 2019, so it's pretty out of date now. And that was he was in Macau. So the reason that he's in China is because after all the stories started coming out about him, Najib was still prime minister. He said, "Well, get out of Malaysia. You'll keep getting recognized on the street, getting photos in the Malaysian newspapers." And so he went to China, and he then did a bunch of corrupt infrastructure deals involving China and Malaysia. And what they were trying to do was steal money from those new deals to fill the hole from the 1MDB theft. And so Joe Loeb knows a lot about all the corruption involved in those. You've probably heard this term Belt and Road, which is China's attempt to build infrastructure around Asia. They build roads and ports and other infrastructure bridges at very low interest rates. But they also corrupt the deals so that people can steal money out of them. And that's what they did with Malaysia. And Joe Loeb knows all about it. We actually got documents that prove all of this. So I can talk about it very definitively. So China doesn't want Joe Loeb to leave China and go and start talking about this, corruption in the Belt and Road deals. And that's one reason that I think he's...
So it's not necessarily that they're holding him there, but they're protecting him and allowing him to stay there and avoid being arrested elsewhere? Or do you think they're actually kind of keeping him there?
Well, it would be embarrassing for Jolo to turn up in the US or Malaysia and start saying everything he knew about that corruption, I think. I think that's one reason. The other is he's just a useful pawn for them. It gets very complicated, but there's a Chinese billionaire living on Central Park South called Guo Wengui, who China wants back, says is corrupt. And the US wants Jolo, and so, there's all this kind of...
A lot of stuff happens behind the scenes.
Yeah, who knows, but
Good.
yeah.
Great, thank you for your question. Good. Okay, we have a when question. Are you going to ask that one too?
Yeah.
Oh, great. 2 for 1.
When did you first realize that you would have to face a lot of challenges to become a journalist, and did that influence your desire to still pursue your career as a journalist?
I guess when I first got my first journalism job was in 1996 in Jakarta with Reuters, and I was an intern there. And I remember just, I don't know if all three of you are journalists. You said you're a newspaper journalist, school. I mean, you sometimes sit and look at the screen and you're like, well, that's an empty screen, right? And that's when I first realized how difficult it is, because you've got to, it's very, very difficult at the beginning because you have to sort of create something off an empty page. And so the way I've always done it, including up till now, is just to copy people. Like the best way to learn is to copy, read widely, and so with Reuters, I had great colleagues that there's a guy here in Singapore called Raju Gopalakrishnan. He's still here in Singapore working for Reuters, and he took me under his wing and taught me how to write my first spot story, where you learn the what, when, where, and or like your questions, right, in the lead paragraph of a story. It's very difficult, but you learn in steps by doing. And then I would read, when I was younger, I'd read The New Yorker, and I always thought that was like the ultimate best journalism, and I would try to copy how they did it, where did things fit, how did they tell stories. But yeah, I find it difficult today. I'm working on a project, Brazen. I'm working on a project right now as a podcast, and that's new to me, and I'm trying to work out how the podcasts work, and it's always like overwhelming, right? Every day. It's not an easy profession, but it's fun.
Good. Okay, our why question. Who's going to ask our why question?
Hi again.
Hi again.
Yes. So, of the multitude of fraud and corruption occurrences, you chose to pick the one about Jolo. There are so many stories happening in the world right now, but why this one specific story?
Why Jolo? Why 1MDB?
Well, I mean, we, as you were saying earlier, the story was actually broken by the Sarawak Report, which is this website run by Claire Rucastle Brown. So we were, at the Journal, we were trying to find ways to write about this story because we realized how big it was. And journalism is always a combination of hard work and then luck. So we did this front page story about, and it's the one you're referring to, I think, about the fraud, but it was a very specific small part of the fraud. We were just showing how it doesn't really matter what it was about, but it was not the whole scope of the thing. But because we ran that on page 1 in the Wall Street Journal at a very specific time when someone in the Malaysian government wanted to leak all of Najib's bank records, they decided to leak it to me because they'd seen that article, and then they were like, okay, well, this is the right place for us. These guys are on this story. So we always, it's like that. I don't know if there's a baseball analogy. You've got to take a swing at it, right? Mm-hmm. Or whatever it is. That's basically it. You don't want to get caught by stasis in journalism. You need to write something, even if it's not the best story, because you're never going to write the definitive story about something complex in your first story. You need to just do something, and then you build sources from that, then people start talking to you, and then you build it up like a brick wall, and I forgot the second part of the question.
Why this story?
Oh, yeah, so yeah, no, I mean, it fell into our laps because of that, right? Because once you I remember getting the Najib bank records. I was like, wow, your heart's beating. You're like, this is a sitting prime minister. And here's his credit card details and his bank. And by the way, he's got $650 million went into his private bank account. So then, it just happens organically then, But I guess what you're getting at as well is how do you choose what you focus on, right, in general? And that is, I always think you need, you don't want to do stuff as a journalist that's just worthy, because it's boring. Like corruption without the Hollywood side and all this isn't that interesting. And we're not regulators. We're also supposed to entertain, right? Because that's how I mean, there are journalism, there are people doing more advocacy journalism, which is like, Panama Papers, for example, right? It wasn't very fun to read the coverage of the Panama Papers because it was very, it was almost doing a public service. Whereas for me, I've always been more interested in, I want to tell a story. Jolo was a great story. And now we're working on, different great characters. So that's how I would choose it. A great story and a meaningful subject matter.
But Tom, also when as a professional working journalist for 20 years or probably 15 years at that point, you had been across many stories across Asia. You had been following, this corrupt story, that corrupt story. You had a sense for what was happening in the region, and the idea of corruption in Malaysia was nothing new even in those days. So it's sort of one block sort of leads to another. In addition to you getting lucky and having that guy give you all that information. Yeah. But it's not like only one day you woke up and decide, I want to cover this. It all comes together. Almost on a daily basis.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
That's the right way of putting it. Yeah, and I'd say, for young journalists, you have to be in the game to play it, right? By which I mean it's the same thing I just said. You have to just start building the stories, right? And then, sometimes the story doesn't go anywhere as well, right? Sometimes you think it's going to be amazing, you do one story and you realize, this is what your editors are for. And Paul Beckett, who you asked me about earlier, he was great at saying, well, we don't need to spend any more time on this because it's not, it's not important enough or the story's not interesting enough. So it's a very difficult balance to what do you really work on, I think, and how do you build up that and it doesn't always work. Sometimes you're very frustrated. You just,
Good.
You're not getting there.
Okay, thank you. Our last student question is a how question. Are you going to do that one too?
Yes, if there's nobody else who'd like to ask it.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, give it to us.
So in a statement regarding your new project, Project Brazen, right? You said that through our painstaking and challenging reporting process, we peel back the cover on international crime, business, and politics. So you mentioned a bit on how you want to do that, but how are you going to choose the projects? Are they going to fall into your lap again, or are you going to go and search them out to actually make them into your project?
So Bradley's writing a book called Project Pegasus, which is it's going to be published by Crown, which is Penguin Random House publisher. So a lot of what we do comes. So maybe we're at an advantage now versus starting off in journalism because we've got a reputation and a brand that means people come to us with stories now, right? So it does get easier, to be honest. And so
when you win international awards for investigative reporting,
it helps.
It helps a lot.
So basically, Bradley's the Project Pegasus is about a bunch of guys from the US, Korean Americans, who went to Yale and other Ivy League schools, who tried to create a North Korean government in exile. And it's a crazy story. They tried to kidnap North Korean ambassadors, and Bradley's known one of the guys who's now on the run from the FBI for 10 years, since when they were in Libya together. So this is the other thing about journalists. You just become a networker, and you try to know as many people as possible, keep their business cards. And this guy came back into Bradley's life. Now he's on the run from the FBI. And Bradley knew him when he was a war reporter in Libya a decade ago. So again, it's not really seeking out. Maybe that's, again, luck, but you also sort of make your own luck because Bradley is an amazing reporter, right? And just knows interesting people. So,
but success leads to success when it comes to journalists who are operating on a very high level that have had, people read your stories, they think, hey, they're well researched and well written, and they sound honestly written. So that, that then leads somebody who might have information that might incriminate somebody to want to come to you versus somebody they don't know.
Maybe, yeah, I think that's right. But also you have to continue to work very, very hard, because journalism is like a really, you'll be proven to be naked if you write a nonsense story that's all wrong, right? And then your reputation's gone. So, right. And it's not. I mean, there's luck and there's hard work and a bit of everything.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thank you very much for the.
Thank you so much.
For the who, what, where, when, why, and how questions from the students here. Now we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. Does anybody have a question? You'd like to raise your hand or come down to the microphone? Anybody? I mean, I got questions all day long for you, Tom, but do want to give you guys a chance in the audience to ask any questions. Don't be shy. Come on, sure. And please be careful coming down the steps when you come down. Yeah, well, sorry.
She made it.
You're right. I was a little bit slow on that. And if you could just give us your name, and are you a parent, a student, a teacher?
You don't recognize me? Hi, my name is Shen Lei. I'm the CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce in Singapore. So thanks for having me here this evening, and thanks for being here with us this evening. The question I have is, during circuit breaker here in Singapore, lockdown as other places call it, a lot of us watched a lot of Netflix and other shows. We listened to podcasts, and hearing you talk earlier about experimenting with podcasts, knowing that your book is being turned into a TV series, does it make you a little bit sad that many people are consuming media via other means than the written word? I know it's very hard for me to get my 2 children to read anything longer than something on Reddit or whatever, and I have books all around the house, but guess what? I'm the only one that reads them. So I wonder how you feel about this transition from the written word over to other forms of consuming information and knowledge.
It's a great question.
Thanks, Shen.
Yeah. I have the same. I have a 10-year-old and a 10-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl, and have the same problem you do. But you know what happened to? It's actually not a really good solution for everybody, because I wrote a book. It got my son really interested in reading books. But just kind of like a long way around to get that to happen, I suppose. I have a rule about reading. I'm not that strict a parent, but you got to read books, and I do it in the physical, just because it's. I feel like I don't trust that they're reading books if they claim they're doing it on a device, right? Could be doing anything. I personally love reading books, but I wonder whether I'm not just being unfair to people who prefer to do it another way, right? It's very middle class to say, well, reading books is somehow better than listening to a podcast. I don't know if that's really true. So we're trying to be more dramatic about it, and we want to reach as wide a range of people as we can as well, right, with the stories that we're doing. And so podcasts are really popular for a number of reasons. One is people commute, and so it reaches a wider range. You can't really read a book that easily commuting. And then the Hollywood studios are really seeing it as a testing ground for movies now and TV shows, because you can more closely show the narrative arc in an audio piece than you can in a book, with the voices, with the tone you're going to take, all that kind of thing. So we're doing it because it's a way to create intellectual property that you then further sell into film or TV. But I don't think books are dying, right? I mean, I know the industry is definitely challenged, but I do, I mean, I love the Kinokuniya here. I'm amazed by the breadth of the cover, and it always seems full of people browsing. So I don't know. People are going to keep reading, right? Maybe it's just in different forms. Yeah.
Hopefully. Yep. Tom, last question, last word for you to our aspiring writers and journalists here in the auditorium or watching us online. What's one piece of advice you can give them, maybe in addition to finding a good mentor, that they can either figure out if this is a career that they want for themselves, or if they know it's already a career they want, how they can jump right into it and learn more about it?
Write to lots of organizations, get yourself an internship, and then when you turn up at the internship, be humble and extremely, extremely hardworking. Soak up things like a sponge. Read widely, read. You know, find journalists. If you don't have a mentor, find journalists in magazines or in newspapers that you like, and re-engineer what they do. Figure out what they're doing, and you're never gonna get good at it. Like at the Journal, the best reporters, young reporters we had, were the ones who would read the paper. There were some reporters who didn't read the paper. You know, read books by journalists. You know, how do they structure it? And just read widely and be very curious as well. Just be curious about the world.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for joining us today here in Singapore, and those of you who are online around the world for this inaugural XCL Dialogues. Tom Wright, thank you for being with us today and sharing your experience.
Thank you.
Nice round of applause for Tom. And just a couple of quick announcements before we leave. The next XCL Dialogue is coming up. We will be sending out information on that. It is going to be an exciting panel discussion among several of the top female leaders in Asia. And so we are very excited to have that coming your way on our very next XCL Dialogue. Please watch your email for more information on that. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done.